The humans silently withdrew, leaving the council to face its own devastation. The Grand Assembly Hall stretched across the heart of the orbital station like a cathedral built for giants. And today it held representatives from 47 species who had gathered to decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador Park Se-gyun stood at the human delegation's platform, his hands folded behind his back as he listened to the voices rising around him. Voices that spoke of humanity with barely hidden contempt. The humans contribute nothing of real value, declared Delegate Morath of the Veloci, his forearms spread wide as he addressed the assembly. They are short-lived creatures who barely understand the technologies they use. And we waste resources including them in our great council. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. And Park watched as species humanity had helped over the past century, nodded along with Morath's words. High Arbiter Vexilin, the ancient insectoid leader of the Kirith, clicked his mandibles and raised one limb for silence. We will hear from other delegates before the vote on Resolution 7742. One by one, they spoke. The Netheri claimed humans were too aggressive and emotional. The same Netheri whose colony ships humanity had rescued from a dying star just 15 years ago. The Aurelian Collective argued that human lifespans were too short for meaningful diplomatic relationships. The same Aurelians whose children human doctors had saved from the Crimson Plague. Voss Dominion suggested humans were primitive and unworthy. The same Voss whose failing power grid human engineers had rebuilt from nothing. Park listened to every word, and his face remained calm even as each accusation cut deeper than the last. Counselor Thyra of the Nethkai watched from her platform with growing unease. She alone seemed to understand what was happening, and she alone seemed afraid of what would come next. Does the human delegation wish to respond? Vexilin asked, his compound eyes turning toward Park. The chamber fell silent, and every alien gaze fixed upon the lone human standing at his platform. Park stepped forward slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried no anger and no desperation. High Arbiter, honored delegates, I have listened to your words with great attention. He paused, looking around the vast chamber at the faces of those who had already decided against his people. Humanity joined this council 112 years ago. He continued, in that time, we have served wherever we were needed, and we have asked for very little in return. We patrolled your dangerous borders. We healed your sick. We built your stations. And we traded fairly with all who would trade with us. Mars shifted impatiently. But Park ignored him. You have called us primitive. Yet we learned your technologies in a single generation. You have called us aggressive. Yet we have never started a war with any council species. You have called us short-lived. Yet we remember every kindness and every insult across our generations. He straightened his uniform and looked directly at Vexilin. We understand your decision. We will not beg for your approval, and we will not fight for a place where we are not wanted. If the council believes humanity offers nothing of value, then humanity accepts this judgment. The silence that followed was absolute. Thyra's hand trembled as she gripped the edge of her platform. She wanted to speak, to object, to remind the council of everything humans had done, but she knew it would change nothing. The vote will now proceed. Vexilin announced one by one. The delegations cast their votes, and one by one, the display showed the same result. In favor of Resolution 7742, when the final count appeared, 41 species had voted to reduce humanity to provisional observer status. Only 6 had opposed the resolution, and Thyra's people were among those 6. Resolution 7742 passes, Vexilin declared. Effective immediately, humanity is removed from full member status. Voting rights, trade privileges, and military cooperation access are hereby revoked. Park bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that seemed almost painful given what had just occurred. The Terran delegation thanks the Council for its time. He said quietly, "We wish you all prosperity in the years to come." Without another word, he gathered his documents and walked toward the chamber exit. His footsteps echoed in the vast space, and not a single voice called after him. Morath laughed as the doors closed behind the human. "Good riddance to the primitives." Several delegates joined his laughter, celebrating what they saw as a long overdue correction. But Thyra did not laugh. Instead, she stared at the closed doors with a growing sense of dread that she could not explain 12 hours later. Ambassador Parks stood before the United Terran government's emergency session on Earth. "They have made their choice," he reported, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "The Council has declared that humanity contributes nothing of value to the galactic community." President Chen Mei-Ling sat at the head of the long table, her expression unreadable as she processed the news. "And what does the ambassador recommend?" She asked. Park was quiet for a long moment before he answered. "Complete withdrawal," he said finally. "We remove every human presence from Council space within 30 standard days. We recall our peacekeepers, our doctors, our engineers, our merchants, all of them." Defense Minister Quan Tae-yang leaned forward. "That will leave massive gaps in their infrastructure and security. They have no idea how much they depend on us." "That is precisely the point," Park replied. "They believe we contribute nothing. Let them discover the truth for themselves." President Chen looked around the table at her advisors, and slowly, one by one, they nodded. "Very well," she said. "Humanity withdraws. We will not be where we are not wanted, and we will not remind them of our value. They will learn that lesson on their own." The order went out that very night, and across the galaxy, human personnel began preparing for the long journey home. None of them knew exactly what would happen after they left, but all of them suspected that the Council would soon regret its decision. The humans did not threaten. The humans did not warn. The humans simply began to pack, and the Council celebrated, never imagining that they had just sealed their own fate. The humans silently withdrew, leaving the Council to face its own devastation. Captain Yoon Ji-hai stood on the observation deck of Outpost Kethra 7, watching her soldiers load the last of their equipment onto the transport ships. For 12 years, she had commanded the human peacekeeping forces in the outer sectors, the most dangerous region in all of Council space. Her soldiers had fought pirates, protected convoys, and died defending species who would never thank them. Now they were leaving, and no one had come to say goodbye. "Captain, the final transport is ready," her second-in-command reported. Yoon nodded slowly, taking one last look at the stars she had patrolled for so long. "Have all local forces been notified of our departure?" "Yes, Captain. The Veloci commander said he was glad to see us go, and the station administrator asked if we could leave our weapons behind." A bitter smile crossed Yoon's face. "Of course he did. Tell him our weapons go where we go." She turned away from the viewport and walked toward the docking bay, passing alien crew members who watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. None of them understood what her forces had been holding back in those dark sectors. None of them knew how many pirate raids had been stopped before they ever reached inhabited worlds. They would learn soon enough at the Council's disease control center on Station Meridian. Dr. Cam Minho was having a very different kind of departure. "You cannot simply leave," the Nethari administrator insisted, his pale eyes wide with something that might have been fear. "The containment protocols for the Ashfall plague require constant monitoring." Kang finished packing his research materials and turned to face the alien. "I have transferred all relevant files to your medical staff, and I have trained 3 of your doctors in the basic procedures. The rest is up to you, but you develop the treatment yourself. Only you truly understand it. Then perhaps the Council should have considered that before declaring humans unnecessary. Kang replied, his voice calm but cold. I am not leaving to punish you, Administrator. I am leaving because I have been ordered to leave. And because your government has decided my species has nothing to offer. The Administrator opened his mouth to protest. But Kang was already walking toward the door. Wait! The Nethari called after him. What if the plague spreads beyond the current quarantine zones? Kang paused at the doorway. Then I sincerely hope your doctors paid attention during training. Good luck, Administrator. The door slid shut behind him, and the Nethari was left alone with the terrible weight of what was coming on the Council's central power station. Engineer Beak Hana supervised her team as they disconnected from systems they had maintained for decades. The station was enormous, a technological marvel that provided energy to 17 inhabited worlds. Human engineers had designed half of its critical systems and had been responsible for keeping everything running smoothly. Chief Beak, an Aurelian technician, approached nervously. There are several subsystems we do not fully understand. Could you perhaps leave documentation? Hannah pointed to a massive data terminal. All technical specifications are stored there, exactly as they were when we first built these systems, but the specifications are in human technical language. We cannot read them. Then learn, Hannah said flatly. We offered to train your engineers for years, but your government always said it was unnecessary. You had humans to do the work, so why bother learning? She sealed the last of her equipment cases and signaled her team to move out. The backup power cores are stable for now, she told the technician. But they require recalibration every 30 cycles, or the cascade buffers will fail. If that happens, you will have about 6 hours to fix the problem before the entire grid goes dark. The Aurelian's face went pale. 6 hours? Good luck, Hana said, and then she was gone. Trade Minister Cho Yunbai closed her office for the last time, leaving behind a network of commercial relationships that had taken generations to build. Human merchants had connected dozens of isolated species to the galactic economy. They had transported goods that no one else would carry, negotiated deals that benefited everyone involved, and kept prices stable across hundreds of worlds. Now the trading posts were closing, the shipping contracts were ending, and the carefully balanced system was about to collapse. Minister Cho, a young Voss trader, intercepted her in the corridor. Is it true that all human merchants are leaving? It is true, but who will transport the medical supplies to the frontier colonies? Who will broker the grain shipments from the agricultural worlds? Cho looked at the young trader with something almost like pity. That is no longer humanity's concern. Your council decided we contribute nothing of value, so we are removing ourselves from the equation. But people will suffer. Yes, Cho agreed quietly. They will. Perhaps you should have thought of that before the vote. She walked past the stunned trader and did not look back across council space. The pattern repeated itself countless times. Human peacekeepers left their posts. Human doctors transferred their patients. Human engineers shut down their equipment. Human merchants closed their doors at each location. There were aliens who mocked them, aliens who ignored them, and a precious few who watched with growing horror. But the humans offered no warnings and made no threats. They simply left. Captain Yoon's final transmission went out as her transport prepared to jump to hyperspace. To all stations in the outer sectors, the human peacekeeping forces have completed their withdrawal as ordered by the Galactic Council. We were honored to serve alongside you. Good luck in the days ahead. There was no response. The transport's engines hummed to life. And within moments, the ship had vanished into the swirling light of hyperspace. The outer sectors fell silent. And for the first time in a century, no human vessels patrolled the darkness between the stars. At Outpost Kethra 7, the station commander watched the empty space where the human fleet had been. Finally, he muttered to himself. Now we can do things properly without those primitives interfering. He turned away from the viewport. confident that the future would be better without humanity. He could not have been more wrong. Deep in the darkness of uncharted space, pirates who had hidden from human patrols for decades began to emerge. They had waited years for this moment, and now their patience would be rewarded. The first attacks would come within the month. The council had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. The humans silently withdrew, leaving the council to face its own devastation. 3 months after the last human vessel departed council space, High Arbiter Vexilin sat in his private chambers, reviewing reports that made no sense to him. Shipping losses in the outer sectors had tripled. Pirate attacks that had once been rare events were now happening almost daily, and the Veloci forces sent to replace the human peacekeepers seemed incapable of stopping them. These numbers cannot be correct, Vexilin muttered, his compound eyes scanning the data again and again. But the numbers were correct, and they were getting worse with each passing week in the outer sectors. Admiral Karath of the Veloci Navy stood on the bridge of his flagship and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. His fleet was one of the most powerful in the galaxy. His warriors were proud, skilled, and eager for battle. They should have crushed the pirate threat within days instead. His ships were scattered across a dozen systems, chasing enemies who seemed to vanish like ghosts. Admiral, his tactical officer, reported, "We have lost contact with the convoy escort in Sector 9. Pirates attacked 17 minutes ago." Karath slammed his fist against the command console. "How is this possible? The humans held these sectors with half our numbers." "The humans knew these territories, Admiral. They had relationships with the local populations who provided intelligence. They understood how the pirates thought and moved. Then we will learn as they did." "With respect, Admiral, the humans spent a century building that knowledge." "We do not have a century." Karath had no answer for that on Station Meridian. The Ashfall Plague had broken through its quarantine zones. Dr. Velith of the Nethari Medical Corps stared at the spreading infection maps with mounting terror. When the humans were here, the plague had been contained to 3 isolated colonies. Now it was on 7 worlds and spreading faster than anyone had predicted. "The treatment protocols are not working," one of his assistants reported. "The plague has mutated, and we do not have the expertise to modify the cure. Contact Dr. Kang," Velith ordered desperately. "Tell him we need his help." "We cannot, Doctor. All communications to human space have been refused since the withdrawal. They are not responding to any council requests." Velith sank into his chair, finally understanding the true cost of Resolution 7742. The humans had developed a treatment. The humans had understood the plague's behavior. The humans had kept it contained through constant vigilance and adaptation, and the humans were gone at the Council's central power station. Cascading failures were becoming a daily occurrence. The Aurelian technicians worked around the clock, trying to maintain systems they barely understood. Every time they fixed one problem, 2 more appeared. "The cascade buffers in Sector 12 have failed," a technician announced, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "We have 6 hours to repair them before the grid collapses." Station Commander Drelax looked at the incomprehensible human technical manuals and felt despair creeping into his heart. "Has anyone been able to translate these documents?" "We have translated the words, Commander, but the concepts make no sense to us. The humans think about power systems in ways we cannot understand, then find someone who can understand." "There is no one, Commander. The humans built these systems, and the humans are gone." 6 hours later, the cascade buffers failed, and 17 worlds experienced complete power blackouts. Millions of beings were left in darkness, and 3 orbital habitats suffered critical life support failures before emergency backups could be activated. Death toll reached 10,000 before power was restored in the Grand Assembly Hall. Councillor Thera, addressed an emergency session with words that many delegates did not want to hear. "We made a terrible mistake," she declared, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. "When we voted to remove humanity from the council, we told ourselves they contributed nothing of value. We were arrogant, and we were wrong." Delegate Morath rose to interrupt. "The Veloci will handle the pirate problem. These are temporary difficulties." "Temporary?" Thera shot back. "Shipping losses have increased 300%. The plague is spreading to new worlds every week. The power grid is failing, and we have no one who can fix it. The humans were not that important. They were essential." Thyra cut him off. "They did the work that none of us wanted to do. They went to the dangerous places, treated the deadly diseases, and maintained the systems that kept our civilization functioning. And we thanked them by casting them out like garbage." The chamber fell silent. High Arbiter Vexilin shifted uncomfortably. "Counselor Thera, your concerns are noted, but surely you exaggerate the situation. Do I?" Thera pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of council space. Red markers indicated pirate attacks, plague outbreaks, infrastructure failures, and supply shortages. The map was almost entirely red. "This is what our galaxy looks like without humanity," Thyra said bitterly. "We did not just lose the humans. We lost everything they quietly held together. For the first time, some of the delegates began to look worried, but Morath was not ready to admit defeat. "We have ruled this galaxy for millennia. We do not need short-lived primitives to solve our problems." "Then solve them," Thyra challenged. "Stop the pirates. Cure the plague. Fix the power grid. Show us the Veloci solution." Morath opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He had no solution. None of them did. As the session ended in bitter arguments and recriminations, Thyra returned to her quarters and opened a private communication channel. "This is Counselor Thyra of the Nethkai," she recorded. "I am attempting to reach the human government on Earth. Please, we need to talk." She sent the message and waited days past with no response. Then weeks the silence from Earth was absolute. And Thera began to understand that humanity would not save them this time. The Council had made its choice. And now the Council would face the consequences alone in the darkness of the outer sectors. Pirates celebrated their growing power. In hospitals across a dozen worlds, the Ashfall Plague claimed more victims. On stations and planets throughout Council space, systems failed and people suffered, and some were far away. Humanity watched and waited. They'd offered friendship, and it had been rejected. They had offered help, and it had been scorned. Now the galaxy would learn what life was like without the species they had called primitive. The lesson would be harsh, but it would be unforgettable. The humans silently withdrew, leaving the Council to face its own devastation. 8 months after humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy was burning. Warlord Sketh stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Council supply convoys scatter before his fleet like frightened animals. The pirate coalition he had built, now calling itself. The burning fleet had grown from a few dozen vessels to over 300 warships. Another convoy destroyed. His lieutenant reported with savage satisfaction. "The Veloci escort fled before we even opened fire." Sketh laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the bridge. "The great Veloci warriors running from pirates. How the mighty have fallen. What are your orders, Warlord?" "Press forward. There is nothing between us and the inner systems now. The humans kept us trapped in the shadows for a century, but the humans are gone. And this galaxy belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it." The burning fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of another destroyed convoy on the agricultural world of Dasara Prime. Food riots had begun. The trade networks that humans had maintained were completely broken. Grain shipments from the outer colonies had stopped. Medical supplies were running critically low. Prices for basic necessities had skyrocketed beyond what ordinary citizens could afford. Families starved while warehouses sat empty. Children died from diseases that should have been easily treatable. Hope was becoming a distant memory, and the plague continued to spread. 12 worlds were now infected, and the death toll had surpassed 1 million souls. The Nethari medical corps worked desperately to contain the outbreak, but they were failing. Every adaptation they tried came too late. Every quarantine they established was breached. Every treatment they developed was insufficient. Dr. Kang Minho could have saved them. His research, his experience, his brilliant mind, all of it had been exactly what they needed. But Dr. Kang was on Earth. And Earth was not answering. High Arbiter Vexilin called emergency session after emergency session. But each meeting ended the same way, with shouting, accusations, and no solutions. We must increase military spending. Morath demanded. Give me more ships, and I will crush these pirates. With what resources? Councillor Thura shot back. Our economy is collapsing. We cannot afford the forces we already have. Then we must. Must what? Thyra interrupted. We have tried everything, Delegate Morath. Your Veloci fleet has been defeated 3 times in the past month. Your proud warriors are dying, and for nothing. Morath slammed his 4 fists on the council table. Do not speak to me of my warriors' deaths. Then stop sending them to die in battles you cannot win. The chamber erupted into chaos. Vexilin tried to restore order, but his authority had crumbled along with everything else. No one listened to the High Arbiter anymore. No one believed the council could save them in the corridors outside the assembly hall. Delegate Morath walked alone with his thoughts. His face, once proud and contemptuous, now showed the weight of everything that had gone wrong. He thought about the human peacekeepers he had mocked, the sane peacekeepers who had held the outer sectors with half the forces he commanded. He thought about their captain, Yoon Ji-hai, whose tactical genius he had dismissed as luck. He thought about the day of the vote, when he had laughed as Ambassador Park walked out of the chamber. How did they do it? He whispered to himself. How did those short-lived primitives accomplish what we cannot? There was no one to answer him. Deep in her private quarters, Councillor Thera recorded another message to Earth. This is Councillor Thera of the Nethkai, she said, her voice breaking with desperation. I know you have received my previous messages. I know you have chosen not to respond. But please, I am begging you. We are dying. She paused, struggling to find the right words. The plague has killed over 1 million beings. The pirates control half of our shipping lanes. Our infrastructure is failing. Our people are starving. Children are dying from diseases we could have cured if we still had your doctors. Tears streamed down her face. I am not asking you to save the council. The council does not deserve to be saved. I am asking you to save the innocent, the families, the children, the beings who never voted against you and who are suffering because of our arrogance. She sent the message and waited. The response came 3 days later. It was a single line of text. And when Thyra read it, she collapsed into her chair and wept. We understand. We will not beg either. The words were Ambassador Park's own, thrown back at them like a mirror reflecting their cruelty. Humanity was not coming. The council had cast them out, and now the council would face the consequences. Alana Vexilin read the message in the next emergency session. And for the first time, the Grand Assembly Hall fell completely silent. No arguments, no accusations, no desperate plans, just silence and the growing understanding that they had destroyed themselves. Morath rose slowly from his seat, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. We did this. Every death, every failure, every catastrophe, we caused it all. We looked at the species that held our civilization together and called them worthless. He turned to face the other delegates. The humans did not abandon us. We drove them away. And now we will pay the price for our arrogance, for the first time since Resolution 7742. No one argued with him. The session ended without a vote, without a decision. Without hope, Council's space continued to burn. The burning fleet grew stronger. The plague spread further. The infrastructure continued to crumble, and somewhere far beyond the Council's reach, humanity watched the galaxy they had once protected tear itself apart. They felt no satisfaction in the Council's suffering. There was no joy in watching civilizations collapse, but they had offered their hand in friendship, and had been slapped away. Some lessons could only be learned through pain. The Council was learning that lesson now, and the education was far from over. The humans silently withdrew, leaving the Council to face its own devastation. 1 year after the humans withdrew, Councilor Thera looked out at a galaxy transformed by catastrophe. The mass Council had lost 40% of its territory to the burning fleet. The Ashfall plague had claimed over 1 billion lives. The economy had collapsed so completely that entire worlds had returned to primitive barter system civilizations that had stood for millennia were crumbling. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. But Thyra was not ready to give up. She had gathered a small delegation, not council representatives, but individuals who understood the truth of what had happened and were willing to admit their guilt. Among them was a young Veloci soldier named Korath, son of Admiral Korath, who had died 3 months earlier in a disastrous battle against the pirates. His father had once mocked humans as primitives, and Korath had been raised to believe the same. Now his father was dead, his fleet was destroyed, and everything he had been taught was proven wrong. "We are approaching human space," the pilot announced. "They have not fired on us, which I suppose is a good sign." Thyra nodded. "Take us to Earth. If they will receive us, we will meet with whoever they send." The journey through human space revealed something none of them had expected. Humanity was thriving. New space stations dotted the transit routes. Merchant vessels traveled in organized convoys. Patrol ships maintained order without any sign of the chaos consuming Council territory. "How is this possible?" Korath whispered. "They were cast out with nothing, and in 1 year they have built all of this?" Thyra studied the gleaming human stations with a mixture of awe and shame. They were never primitives. They were never worthless. We were simply too arrogant to see their true capabilities. As they approached Earth, they passed vessels belonging to species the Council had long ignored, small civilizations that had never been offered membership, remote colonies that had been abandoned by their founders, forgotten peoples who had been left to fend for themselves. These species had found a new protector, and they wore the flag of the United Terran government with obvious pride. They built new alliances, Thera realized. While we were destroying ourselves, they were building something better. The delegation landed on Earth and was escorted to a simple government building, nothing like the grand palaces of the Council, but clean and efficient. Ambassador Park Sojun was waiting for them. He looked older than Thera remembered. His hair had more gray, and his eyes carried a weariness that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. But he still stood with the same quiet dignity he had shown on the day of the vote. "Councilor Thyra," he said, his voice neutral. "I did not expect to see you here." "I am not here as a councilor," Thyra replied. "The Council no longer exists in any meaningful way. I am here as an individual, representing only myself and those who chose to come with me." Park studied the small delegation. Thera, young Korath, a Netheri doctor, an Aurelian engineer, and 3 others from species that had voted against humanity. "Why have you come?" he asked. Thera took a deep breath. "To apologize. Not politically, but personally. I watched what happened in that assembly hall, and I did too little to stop it. I knew we were making a terrible mistake, and I let my fear of speaking out overcome my conscience." She lowered her head. "I am sorry. I am truly, deeply sorry." Silence filled the room then. Young Korath stepped forward and, To everyone's surprise, lowered himself to one knee before Park. My father was Admiral Korath, he said, his voice trembling. He laughed at your people. He called you weak and primitive. He believed Veloci strength would solve any problem. Korath looked up at Park with eyes full of shame. My father died because he was wrong. Thousands of my people died because we were too proud to learn from you. I am not here to demand anything. I am here to learn. I am here to understand what made humanity capable of what we could never accomplish. Park looked at the young Veloci kneeling before him, and something in his expression softened. Stand up, young one, he said gently. The mistakes of your father are not your burden to carry. Korath rose, confusion in his eyes. You do not hate us? We never hated you, Park replied. We were hurt. We were disappointed. But hatred serves no purpose. We left because staying where we were not wanted would have been an insult to ourselves. He walked to the window and looked out at the city beyond, a city full of humans going about their lives, building their future, helping their new allies. I will be honest with you, Park continued. Humanity will not save the Council. That institution rejected us, and we have moved on. We have built new partnerships with species who value what we offer, and we will not abandon them to return to an organization that despised us. Thera's heart sank. But Park was not finished. However, we are not without compassion. If individual worlds request our assistance, not the Council, but individual planets in genuine need, we will consider their requests. You would help those who voted against you? The Nathari doctor asked Park turned to face him. We would help those who are suffering, regardless of how their governments voted. That is simply who we are. The delegation exchanged glances of wonder. After everything the Council had done, humanity was still willing to extend a hand over the following weeks. Negotiations proceeded slowly, but steadily. Humanity agreed to send medical teams to plague-affected worlds, not as Council members, but as humanitarian volunteers. They agreed to train alien engineers in the systems they had designed. They agreed to share intelligence about pirate movements, but they made one thing absolutely clear. They would work with individual species as equal partners. Never again as subordinates, young Korath was among the first to be assigned to a joint reconstruction project, a damaged station on the edge of former Council space. He worked alongside human engineers, learning their methods, understanding their thinking, and slowly realizing how much his people had underestimated them. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Korath sat beside a human worker named Engineer Kim Jun-seo. Can I ask you something? Korath said, Of course. After everything we did to your people, why are you here helping us? Why do you not simply let us suffer the consequences of our arrogance? Jun-seo thought about the question for a long moment before answering. My grandmother used to tell me a story, he said. She said that when someone wrongs you, you have three choices. You can take revenge, you can walk away, or you can offer your hand again. Revenge makes you as bad as they are. Walking away is sometimes necessary, but it solves nothing. He looked at Korath with a gentle smile. Offering your hand again, that is the hardest choice. But it is also the only one that can truly change things. But what if they reject you again? Then we walk away again, knowing we tried. But you are here, are you not? Your people hurt us, and yet here you are, working beside us, learning from us, trying to build something better. Jun-seo placed a hand on Korath's shoulder. Someone has to take the first step toward healing. Sometimes that someone is the one who was wronged. That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength there is. Korath looked at the human with new understanding. This was why humanity had thrived while the Council collapsed. Not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they understood something fundamental about existence, that the Council had forgotten. Compassion was not weakness. Forgiveness was not surrender. Helping others was not a burden. It was a purpose. The galaxy would never return to what it had been. And perhaps that was for the best. The old council had been built on arrogance and false superiority. Whatever came next would need to be built on something better, and perhaps, with humanity's help, it could be.